Are you taping?
Yeah.
Already. Can I tell you about my personal life? Just a few sentences, and then we'll come back and talk about my Navy life.
Absolutely.
I was born in 1926, and that makes me 93 years old. And I heard on my TV where 2% of us are still alive that was in World War II. Now, I thought it was a little more than that, but that's what they said. But anyway, I graduated from high school at St. Joseph's School and went to war in 1944. I went on, and I was 19 months in the Navy, gone, and came back, and a year later married my girlfriend that was in high school, Mary Adelaide. We had a lot of Marys in our family, and that separates her from all the rest of the Marys. And anyway, we had 3 children and 14 grandchildren and a bunch of greats, and I counted up all of them in my family. We come up with 69 descendants, including me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
I ran a lumberyard down in downtown Conway for 50 years, or where the drugstore is now.
Do you know what was it called? The lumberyard?
Huh?
What was the lumberyard called?
Hiegel Lumber Company. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And anyway, we sold that to the drugstore right there at the corner on Oak and Harkrider. And when I was in World War II, I was on an aircraft carrier, and learned to love airplanes, I guess. And after I was married a few years, I started flying on my own and joined the Civil Air Patrol. And we could fly the CAP planes just to buy the gas. And that's where I really put some time in. I ended up with a total of 3,000 hours flight time. I flew airplanes for 60 years. I got one certificate from FAA for flying 50 years without an accident. I worked at the lumberyard all week, and I flew airplanes, and it was my biggest hobby. I had 2 hobbies really. I had a metal locator, which I did a lot of metal locating at where they had a Civil War battle on the Saline River, south of Little Rock, 40 miles or so down there, and when my metal locator dug up a lot of Civil War material. But that was my 2 main hobbies in my life. Back to my time in the service. You ready for that? My best buddy lived in Little Rock, and we were about to get called up in the draft, and
Were you 18?
Were
you 18 at the time?
I was 17 at the time. I was 18 by the time I got into battle, but I was 17 when we decided that we were gonna get drafted, and we fit the Navy better than we did the Army. So we went to Little Rock, and sure enough, they took us in, swore us in, gave us a physical down there, and we passed it. And we had big plans to go to boot camp together, but they sent me to San Diego and sent him to Idaho. So I was by myself at boot camp. That don't really put you in the Navy. That's because you go to Little Rock and you swear to uphold the Constitution and all that. You're not a veteran. You can't get veteran materials from the veteran VA and all that yet. So you're really not in the Navy yet, just because you swore in down there in Little Rock. And so they sent me to San Diego, and first thing they did was another physical, and I passed it. Then they got rid of our civilian clothes and put on Navy outfits, and gave us a sea bag and all our Navy clothes, and taught us how to roll those clothes and get them real tight and pack them down in that sea bag, and everything I owned was in that one sea bag. But that still didn't put me in the Navy. Well, here come the shots. So we had stand in line to get our shot. And I got a couple of shots. I don't know what they were for, but anyway, we were all standing in line waiting to go in this room to get our shot. And some of the boys would watch people get shots in there, and they couldn't take it, and they would faint. They'd faint out and be down there on the floor. And they said, "Oh, he'll be all right." Said, he's doing good. He'll come to after a while. So the line just went around, and we just kept going. Yeah. And that didn't put us in the Navy yet. Okay. The last thing, they came around with our dog tags with a number on it, and that's when you could declare that you were a sailor. You were ready to join the Navy. When I got my number. Anyway, I went through boot camp. Quite a few things went on in boot camp. I might tell you about 2 or 3 things in boot camp. One of the things you were taught to trust your buddy, your seaman, the other boy sailors, and you there's a platform 4 or 5 feet tall, and you crawl a little ladder, and you get up on top, and you walk to the other side, and all your seamates were on the other side. You walked over there, and you turn around, and you fell off of that thing backwards, and you hope your buddies caught you before you hit the deck. Yeah, that was kind of a frightening thing to do. We learned about gas. I think it was kind of a leftover thing from World War I, maybe, which was 18 or so years before. And they had this Quonset hut full of gas. I don't know what kind of gas it was, but you walked in. You put your what do you call it on to take care of your
Your mask?
Yeah, put a mask on and all. You walked into one end of this Quonset hut, and you walked plumb through and came out the other end. When you got halfway through, you take your gas mask off, and here comes your eyes start crying and watering and sniffling and blowing, carrying on and coughing, and you walked out the other end. Now, if you ran out the other end, they'd make you turn around and go back through again. So that didn't help you any. Probably one other thing, we marched to a place called Mission Beach, and the Navy had a great big swimming pool out there on the Pacific Beach. Big, wide, deep swimming pool, and it was filled with seawater. And they taught us how to abandon ship. And one of the things that we had to do was to crawl up this ladder, and I don't know how high, it was 30 or 40 feet up, pretty high. Seemed like it was 1,000, but it wasn't that high. But anyway, we had our helmets on and life jackets and all that, and we would take the strap off of our helmet so when we hit the water it wouldn't break our neck. And kind of like a diving board, when you got up there, there was 3 or 4 boys ahead of me, and I dreaded it. I didn't want to do that, but I figured if some other boys ahead of me could do it, I can too. Yeah. So I followed them and stepped off the end of that board, just like being out in the open spaces, and wham, down I hit the water, and they taught us how to swim away from the ship, because many times there would be burning oil and you'd have to swim out away, and when the ship would sink, it would cause a suction in that water, and it'd suck you down under if you wasn't swimming away from it. But there's quite a few things went on in boot camp like that I remember. But anyway, after boot camp, I went to radar school at Point Loma, which is part of San Diego, Point Loma, and I went to radar school there for a few weeks, about a month. After that, I was sent to a Marine camp, I think it was. It called it Camp Elliott, Elliott, which is part of Miramar now, but it's been changed up a little bit. It's right out of Los Angeles, up in the mountains. Stayed there a couple of weeks until they got a troop ship and had room for me to get on that troop ship, and I stepped off the United States soil February 14th, 1945, and got on this troop ship loaded with boys, Army boys and all, and we left. Took about 12 days to get to Philippines, not the Philippines, to what we call the islands out there. But half the Army boys were sick and it stunk, and you couldn't hardly eat for the stink, and anyway, you'd ask one of those boys, said, "You got a weak stomach?" He says, "No, I don't have a weak stomach. I can throw it as far as anybody." They were just lined up along the edge. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, we got out there in Hawaii, ended up in Hawaii. Had to be on a Navy base 2 weeks before they let you go to Honolulu. So I put my 2 weeks in and ready to go to Honolulu. Got up in my dress blues, standing in line there to wait on Navy bus to take me to Honolulu. Here come walking by a little sailor, and he was reading everybody's name. He said, "You Hiegel?" "Yeah, I'm Hiegel." says so-and-so captain wants to talk to you in a certain building. So I had to get out of line, go there and talk to him. And we talked a little bit, and he said, what kind of a ship would you like to be on? I said, well, I'm not sure, but about anything except a troop ship. Now, I've been on a troop ship, and they're pretty bad. They're pretty So we talked a little bit, and he said, okay, well, now, what's your preference? And I said, well, if I had my choice, I'd take an aircraft carrier. He said, oh, what do you want on the carrier for? Well, I live 2 blocks from the airport in Conway, and when I went to school, I could see the airport from the second story in the school that I went to. And UCA had a program that taught Army boys and all how to fly. And they had a program going on over at the airport, and I could watch all those airplanes. And I said, if I had a choice, I'd just take an aircraft carrier. He thought a little bit, and he said, tell you what, I've got an aircraft carrier sitting out here in the bay, and they are leaving in the morning, going over to the war. And he says, I'm going to put you on there. I says, okay. He said, you go back to the barracks and you get out of those dress blues and put on your dungarees, and you check in to the USS Independence that's sitting out here in the bay. So I did, checked in out there. Yes, and seaman took me to a bunk. He said, here's your bunk. And that's all the orientation I ever got on the aircraft carrier. I never did get to see the whole carrier. But anyway, I took that bunk. I said, okay. So I got in that bunk overnight, and turned out to be the library and there was about 200 or 300 books in there. And it was a room about as big as this room here, and there was a bunch of bunks in there. Turned out I was the only one in there, and I couldn't figure that out. But I took my bunk, and the next morning my ship pulled out at full speed to go to war, and I found out why I was the only one in there. It was down in the bows on the stern back end of that ship, and it was right on top of the screws, and it was going all night long. You couldn't hardly sleep back in there. Anyway, I found my way up to the what we call CIC room, Combat Information Center, and my room was just barely off of the Combat Information Center, and my radar room was, and I found the radar room, was talking to some other sailors in there, and we talked a little bit, and I asked if anybody had an open bunk that I could move to. I said, I got to get out of that place where I'm at. Nobody did, and finally one of the photographers spoke up, and he was in our division, they call it, and he was in there, and he said, I've got an open bunk, but it's in our dark room, and about all we turn on is dim infrared lights where they work their pictures. And he said it's above the hatch, the doorway there. It's about 7 feet up. And I said, well, I'll take it. So I moved into that and stayed there for a year. And I watched them watch the photographers do their work. They'd take their film out of the camera and put it in this bath and put it in another bath and rinse it and take it over here and make an 8x10 out of it and put it over here in the big dryer. And I watched that for a couple of days, and I said, shoot, I could do that, you know. And that's one of them. I said, what, can I look? They had a whole row of desk drawers there full of film. I said, can I look through this film and copy my own pictures? Yeah, you do what you want to. So I did, and that's the way I sent a lot of photographs home, and that's really how I ended up in the later years. Our bunch, I got to be historian of the reunion group later on. And anyway, my ship went to a little island area called WWII, and we anchored there.
What was the name of the island?
ULITHI, WWII. And it was an open throat of a volcano about 20 miles around, and it was a good anchor place, and there was more ships there than I could count. And Admiral Halsey had his, what was known as a fast carrier fleet there. And the war in Europe was winding down, and all those ships, they didn't need the big ships and big guns over there anymore in the water, so they all went through the Panama Canal or around the foot of Africa or whatever was there, South America. And they were all there, and there was ships as far as you could see. And we were all going to take Okinawa. And Admiral Halsey wanted all the carriers for sure that he could get to be there, and we were one of them. So we stayed there just a few days, and then the whole fleet left for Okinawa, the Battle of Okinawa, the biggest battle in the Pacific. Anyway, we would watch B-29s come in over the fleet, and they were leaving from the south to go bomb Tokyo and so on. And I'd watch the B-29s, looked like log wagons on my radar screen, and I knew who they were. And I heard one time if they all got one behind the other and head in the row, it'd take 40 miles for them to cross over. But anyway, they were in groups, and they were flying off of Saipan, island of Saipan, and that they had just taken, and island of Tinian, Tinian, and Guam. They were, B-29s were leaving those three places, and they would pass over the fleet. And the fleet was subjected to mostly kamikaze boys. Most of the Japanese shipping was gone by the time I got there, and they still had a few submarines. But there was like 1,500 kamikazes. You know what kamikaze?
Suicide pilot fighters.
K-A-Z-E, yeah. They'd take their airplane, put a bomb in it, and head for the fleet and the biggest carrier they could find. And I was lucky that I was on the second biggest carrier, so I didn't get hit by a kamikaze. Just lucky out of 1,500. But the B-29s would help us fight the Battle of Okinawa by bombing the kamikaze airports. They knew where they were flying off of and how many airplanes, and they would bomb kamikaze airfields, and they had first shot at the kamikazes. When the kamikaze boys left their home island, we had a row of destroyers between us and the main island of Japan, and this had a row of destroyers out there, and as the kamikazes would come across, they had second shot at them, and they shot down a lot of kamikazes on the way across. And if a kamikaze got hit, couldn't make it to the fleet with his bomb, he would dive into one of those ships that was between us and the main part of Japan, and those boys on really caught hell. They took a lot of kamikazes. If they got past that row of destroyers and headed toward the fleet, we had fighter planes, F-6F Hellcats, up in the air continuously, 24 hours a day, and we directed them out behind the kamikaze, and they'd shoot down most of them before they got to the fleet. And if they got away, too many of them got over the fleet, then the fleet started shooting at them, and the kamikazes led a horrible life before they even got to kill themselves. As close as my ship got to getting hit by a kamikaze, that we got a kamikaze got in over the fleet, and the fleet guns were shooting at him on the way down, and he lost control. He couldn't get to a big carrier, so he took my carrier to dive into, and he lost control. He hit the water at the outside the front bow. He didn't hit the ship, he hit the water right in front of us, and a flak from friendly fire killed one of the boys on my ship, on the flight deck of my ship. That's how close I came to getting hit by a kamikaze, which is too close. Anyway, we lost 52 men off my ship. Before I got on it, it took a torpedo at Tarawa and killed 17, and it went back to the States and got repaired and came back, and then that's when I got on it and went to war with it.